Go Long by Hazel Witch. Read by Kaiinbed. Chapter 9 Polaris. Content warning. A reminder that this fic depicts 17-year-old characters and include consensual, explicit scenes. Please click away if that's going to make you uncomfortable. The last weeks before winter break were spent sneaking off to make out whenever and wherever they got the opportunity. Although they had their preferred venues, namely Katsuki's basement and occasionally Izuku's bedroom, it turned out they both had an itch that only some heavy-duty necking could scratch. And so, making do with slightly less private surroundings became a necessity. The janitor's supply closet, the music room before school, the secret spot they discovered around the back of the chemistry lab, all were locations they could turn to in a pinch. And yeah, okay, it was a little risky, and maybe totally at odds with Izuku's mundane existence before Katsuki barged headlong into his life. But when a gorgeous boy with muscles for days and eyes that could rival the sun grabbed your hand and murmured, "Follow me," in a rumbly baritone voice, you didn't ask questions, you followed. It made Izuku's heart race whenever Katsuki pulled him somewhere dark and quiet, tugging him closer and hunting down every taste of his mouth with his tongue. Quick hands rolled, Katsuki's fingers agile, always the first to touch and last to linger on freshly discovered skin. They learned each other quickly, new experiences casting light on things Izuku hadn't known about himself, like the fact it had made him tingle from head to toe when Katsuki kissed his neck, or the fact he could convey 1,000 bodily signals in one long, slow blink, convincing Katsuki to cast aside any game or textbook without a word ever crossing his lips. With every day that passed, Izuku felt his outer layers shed, felt the strain of all he'd been carrying on his shoulders begin to ease. It was like shrugging off a thick winter coat and settling down by the fireside. He realized how heavy it all felt. The worry, the nervousness, the anxiety. Katsuki left no room for it, barreled his way into each of Izuku's insecurities, and blew them open wide with a scoff and a roll of his eyes. He didn't pile on the praise, but he never let Izuku talk down to himself either, challenged every self-deprecating comment like he was a king taking court. He made a ruling, and he expected Izuku to take it as law. God, I'm so awkward, Izuku mused one day after bumping into one of his classmates and apologizing approximately 50 times. The fuck's your definition of awkward? Katsuki huffed, chewing gum noisily as they strolled between classes. The hallways had been decorated with tinsel and paper chains, cheery candy cane colors to remind them of the upcoming holiday. Did you not see the way that chick looked at you? She's fucking putty in your hands, Deku. All of them are. Izuku coughed. That's not true, he said, laughing lightly at the thought. Katsuki seemed to believe Izuku should adopt the same unshakable self-confidence that seeped out of his own pores like sweat. Oh shit, right. I forgot we're supposed to pretend you're this massive nerd that no one likes. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Forgot we're not supposed to acknowledge the fact that half the senior class would walk themselves over a fucking cliff if you asked them to, and the other half would line up nicely to go next. Kachan, Izuku said, intentionally whining, flushing red and glancing around to check no one was listening. Delusional. Sure, that fits. Katsuki continued, ignoring Izuku's protest. But awkward? No way, Freckles. Can't let you have that one. He swung himself around the doorframe of his classroom, holding Izuku's gaze. See you tonight? It still gave Izuku butterflies, that voice that curled around him like a wisp of wood smoke. Sure, he replied, smiling softly and wondering how he'd gotten so very lucky. And then, before Izuku knew it, the semester was winding down to a chorus of carols and cheesy Christmas music, and the first few months of senior year came to a close. Deku, 6:05 a.m. Merry Christmas, Kachan! Christmas tree, Santa, snowman, Christmas tree, star emojis. What's the weather like where you are today? Any snow? Snowflake, snowflake, snowflake. We have some here, but it's kind of already turned into gray sludge, lol. I guess you wouldn't know that because you only left a few days ago. So the snow is basically the same, except more sludgy. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day and get some cool presents. I asked my mom for an All Might subscription for Christmas. I'll let you read them with me if you're nice, and don't call me a dumbass for at least a week. KB, 6:10 a.m. DUMBASS. You know what time it is, right? Why are you awake? Deku, 6:11 a.m. Oh, sorry, did my messages wake you? I just get excited on Christmas. Haha, I always get up early. KB, 6:15 a.m. Why am I not surprised at all? You're like a little kid that's had too many sodas. Deku, 6:15 a.m. Sad emoji. Well, now I'm not gonna let you read All Might with me. KB, 6:16 a.m. Thank God. Deku, 6:17 a.m. You don't mean that. KB, 6:18 a.m. I fucking do. Deku, 6:18 a.m. Sad emoji. Okay, I'll read them by myself then. Or I'll ask Todoroki, because I know he'll at least pretend to be interested. KB, 6:19 a.m. ... Don't you fucking dare. Deku, 6:20 a.m. What? I'm just sparing you. You say you don't want to read them. And Shoto's a good friend like that. KB, 6:20 a.m. Alright, fuck. I'll read the damn comics with you. God. Deku, 6:21 a.m. Yay, thanks, Kachan. KB, 6:25 a.m. There's snow here too. Deku, 6:25 a.m. Ooh, is it pretty? KB, 6:26 a.m. Question mark. It's just snow. Deku, 6:26 a.m. I bet it's super pretty. I hope you're having a good time and everything's okay with your mom. KB, 6:35 a.m. It's fine. Deku, 6:36 a.m. That's great. Okay, well, I better go. I can hear my mom putting on Mariah Carey. LOL. Have a good day, Kachan. Oh, and ... All I want for Christmas is you. OMFG, that was so cheesy. Okay, bye. I'm about to die. Forget I said that. Facepalm emoji. KB, 6:36 a.m. Straight face emoji. I hate that song. Trash. Tell your mom to get better taste in music. KB, 8:43 a.m. By the way, there's somewhere I want to take you when I'm back. Keep the first weekend of school free, okay? Deku, 8:45 a.m. Like a date? KB, 8:45 a.m. Merry Christmas, Deku. As they eased into the new year, every day dragged with anticipation until the dark Saturday night when Katsuki blared his horn in front of Izuku's lawn to signify the start of their very first date. Where are we going? Izuku asked as he hopped up into the jeep and slammed the door. It's a surprise, was all he got in reply, Katsuki fiddling with the sound system and adjusting his mirrors. When they finally got going, he took a right at the main junction, taking them away from the center of town rather than into it. Instead, the road snaked up the hillside into a weaving series of turns, forcing Katsuki to slow to navigate each bend. The soft notes of an acoustic track filtered through the speaker, warming every nook of the car with its mellow chords. Katsuki's fingers thrummed against the wheel in time with the slow beat, and Izuku tapped a happy foot along with him, basking in easy company and comfortable silence, cozy and content never to actually reach their destination. Wherever it was, they were headed anyway. Here we go, Katsuki said on cue, flicking up the indicator. Hope you were taking notes when I told you to bundle up. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels. Izuku pressed his nose against the window to peer out. Katsuki had pulled them into a lookout spot, large enough for only a couple of cars, fringed with trees that cut out at the cliff edge and sloped towards the flickering lights of the town. Here? Izuku said, breath quickly steaming the glass. You're not going to axe murder me or something, are you, Kachan? Katsuki shut the engine off, throwing them into pitch black. Don't be stupid, he replied. This ain't a bad place to dispose of a body. But everyone knows you gotta chop that shit up and dissolve it in acid, Deku. And I got better things to do than scrub blood out of leather seats. He clicked on the interior light, zipping up his parka. What do you think? You ready, Freckles? Still unsure exactly what for, homicide hopefully off the cards, Izuku wound another coil of soft red scarf around his neck, a Christmas gift from his mom, and dug around in his pockets for gloves. Ready! Even though he braced himself before opening the door, the cold air was still an icy punch to the face. Winter wind, chilly and cruel. It was only 8 o'clock, but in the dead of January there was no one else around, only the occasional rumble of an engine along the road behind them, the casting of eerie, elongated shadows through the trees. Otherwise, they were all alone. Won't stay long, Katsuki said from his side, slamming the door. Spiky tufts of blonde hair poked out from beneath his beanie, and he clutched a blanket in one hand. Just heard it's the best spot to look at stars this time of year. We're stargazing? Uh-huh. Katsuki looked supremely pleased with himself, testing a foot on the bumper to see how much weight it could bear. Then, wielding his foot, he propped himself up onto the hood, clambering over the windshield and onto the roof. Come on, he said, reaching an arm down and offering his hand. On principle, Izuku shook his head and scrambled up behind him without assistance. The metal squeaked slightly as he took up position, shuffling until he was facing the valley, knees pulled up to his chest. Wedged together, they could just about fit on the small square roof without toppling off either side, but it meant pressing up close, just to make sure. Shared body heat helped a little with the cold, and also gave Izuku an excuse to nestle under the crook of Katsuki's arm when he threw the blanket around them. Warm enough? Mm-hmm. It was still frosty as hell, to be honest, but if it meant Izuku could be out here, on the side of the quiet hilltop with Katsuki, he would take a case of hypothermia and deal with the consequences later. So he buried his nose into the soft wool of his scarf and cast his eyes upwards. Wow, he said on a sharp breath. It's amazing. The stars really were bright out here. Without any light pollution, they were all somehow more distinct, scattered overhead in a canopy of tiny white flecks. 1,000 pink splatters against an endless dark canvas. He glanced to the side and found Katsuki already looking at him, returning his grin. Told you, he murmured, breaking eye contact to look at the sky. They each spent a moment taking it all in, Izuku warming up from the inside out. They were so close that Katsuki's breath tickled his ear when he spoke again, low but not as gruff as it normally was. You know any constellations? Izuku trailed his eyes across the expanse of navy black to find something he recognized. Only the obvious ones, he said, spotting 3 stars in an almost perfect straight line and pointing them out. Like there, I know that's Orion's belt. I'm just not sure where the rest of Orion is. Katsuki snorted. Trust you to be the most interested in a guy's pants, he said, this time full of snark, and Izuku hefted a playful shoulder against him. Hey. When he'd finished snickering, Katsuki leaned in close again and pointed above them. Okay, so with Orion, you just gotta look for the triangle above his belt. See? Using a finger to trace the shape in the sky, he connected the stars together with an invisible line. That's his shoulder, right? Then off to the side, he drew another curving line downwards. That's his bow. Wow. To be honest, Orion was actually a grade A asshole. Katsuki continued, matter of fact, moving to point out a spot where several stars held closer together than the others. See that cluster right there? Mm-hmm. That's the Pleiades, but people call them the Seven Sisters. There's a Greek myth about Orion chasing after them like a giant fucking pervert, so Zeus turned them into stars to keep them safe. That doesn't really seem fair. I mean, by Zeus's standards, it ain't too bad. Izuku stared and stared, even though the distant, blinking pinpricks of light were lifetimes apart in reality. It was kind of beautiful, the way they were all woven together by the stories of old. Tucking his arms back beneath the blanket and hugging them to his chest, he looked for the brightest star in the sky. That's the North Star, right? Katsuki nodded. Yeah, Polaris. Part of Ursa Minor. Izuku gazed up at it, committing the name to memory. Polaris, he murmured. It's beautiful. This place is too. There was something calming about the stillness, the occasional crunch of leaves giving away the wildlife in the shadows. He'd never been a fan of the night, always been wary of the things that could hide in it. But none of that felt relevant with Katsuki at his side. Stealing a quick sideways glance at him, Izuku made his voice soft. How do you know so much about stars? With his eyes grown accustomed to the darkness, he could take in Katsuki's profile. The slant of his jaw and set of his mouth, skin freshly shaven and smooth, almost silver in the moonlight. There was this observatory near my old town. Held talks and shit sometimes. Used to go there every year. With your mom and dad? Yeah. He didn't look down or meet Izuku's eyes. Just let the silence hang without changing the subject. It wasn't an invitation as such, but it wasn't a slamming down of the hatches either. Izuku chewed on his lip. Am I allowed to ask? Ask what? Why'd you move here? An owl hooted somewhere off in the woods, in the pause before Katsuki shrugged. I guess so, he said slowly, tucking the blanket higher on his shoulders. It's not like there's any big fucking secret or anything. My dad got a job offer here, so we moved. Izuku watched the way his mouth set back into a slant, stoic and sharp and giving nothing more away. But your mom, he felt Katsuki stiffen. Yeah, she stayed. What happened? Izuku asked quickly. You don't have to talk about it if you're not comfortable. Chill, Freckles. Pale brows knitting together, Katsuki looked straight out over the valley, mouth scrunched to one side. Izuku could tell by the way his jaw was clenching that he was chewing on the inside of his cheek. Okay. So everyone's always told me I take after my mom, right? He said in a low voice. Ever since I was a little kid. First it was just that I was her spitting fucking image or whatever. But then as I got older, it was more than that. Body language, I guess. The way I talk, how I act. He cleared his throat and began tapping a foot rhythmically against the roof, setting the car into a gentle rock. People always say I'm just like her. So that gives you the context. She's, I don't know, fiery, I guess. A handful. Dropping his chin to his knees, Izuku tilted his head to one side so he could watch Katsuki speak. We'd butt heads a lot when I was growing up, get into arguments and shit, but it was always somehow okay, because my old man knew how to handle her, knew how to calm her down until she chilled the fuck out. A hint of affectionate scorn entered his voice. The dude's a massive sap, kind of guy to bring home flowers every night just to make her happy. 2 of them were disgusting when I was a kid. Dear old dad with goddamn puppy eyes. PDA all over the place. Made me want to barf up my breakfast every morning. The muscle in his jaw flexed. But then, he got promoted and started working late, and things changed. My mom's always been fucking crazy, shouting and screaming in public like a fucking banshee. No filter whatsoever. But it ramped up when my dad started coming home late. Every damn night was an argument. The neighbors complained like 5 times because my mom was so fucking shrill. And my dad never fought back. Just kept saying it would get better. That his workload would cut down over time. That things would get easier. Katsuki's knees stopped bouncing. But it never did. It just carried on like that for over a year. A whole damn year of yelling and promises and then more fucking yelling when he couldn't keep the damn promises he made. And my mom just got so riled up about it all. I don't know. I guess she felt abandoned or whatever. But still. By the end, it was like living in a house with 2 strangers because they barely said a word to each other. Just lived 2 separate lives. Izuku felt his lip wobble. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like living in a household of silence. Especially when it had once been so full of love. Then one day, Dad's company offered him the position here and he just Said yes. Didn't even ask my mom. Didn't even check with her. When he finally did tell her, she didn't even blow up over it. Just seemed done. Like, really done. Exhausted. He twisted his neck to look down at Izuku. So we moved, and she stayed. Gazing back into fiery irises that defied anyone to feel sorry for him, Izuku just held eye contact and reined in his sympathy before he said anything in response. If Katsuki was anything, he was proud, and Izuku knew he wouldn't appreciate pity. Did you think about staying with your mom? He asked instead. Katsuki scoffed. I mean, sure, I thought about it. Not as if I wanted to just up and leave everything behind either. But without my old man in the picture, we get at each other, me and her. She pushes my buttons, and I sure as shit push hers. We'd have burned the damn house down if my dad wasn't around to keep the peace. The man's just as much a martyr as you are. Izuku smiled weakly, and Katsuki looked away again. It felt like the world around them had pressed in to listen, the sky lower and more oppressive than before, almost within reach. Plus, it was my mom's fault in the first place that they split. If she didn't blow a fuse over the tiniest goddamn thing, maybe they could have stayed together. Made it work. But she always goes at everything 100 miles per hour, no matter what, and she always has to be right. You can't just... He paused, a long breath hitching in his chest, shoulders rising and falling. You can't just expect people to stick around when you're like that. It's too much. Everyone wants an easy life, right? No one wants to be around someone who's hard fucking work. Even my dad couldn't handle it eventually, and he's a paragon of fucking patience. A living goddamn saint. So it just goes to show, nobody's gonna stay for like that. If you're hard and difficult and snap at everyone all the time, eventually, you end up alone. There was bitterness in his voice, harsh and quiet. He continued to look off towards the dense edge of the forest, the muscle tight in his jaw. Izuku watched him for a minute in silence. He knew Katsuki well enough by now to know that somewhere tangled up in what he just said were not just feelings about his mom, but feelings about himself too. The self-loathing that came when you were presented with your own insecurities, only to have them validated at every turn. He knew that feeling only too well. Maybe the two of them weren't so different after all. Slowly, cautiously, he nudged his arm away from Katsuki's side and reached his gloved hand up under the blanket to rest on Katsuki's bare one. His fingers were too fat with the added layers of fabric to lace them together properly, but he cupped Izuku's palm in his own as best as he could, like an old married couple. It kinda sounds like the whole thing was complicated, he said quietly, watching Katsuki's face for a reaction. He gave none, not even a scowl, but he didn't wrench his hand away, allowing Izuku to squeeze it gently. It sounds like it wasn't just your mom's fault that things turned out the way they did. It sounds like they both had a part to play. Katsuki grunted in acknowledgement, but still didn't turn to face him. Izuku took it as a sign to venture on. And what you said, about your mom being hard work. I think everyone is hard work at times, Kachan. We all have our flaws, don't we? You sure know all of mine. Flaws, schmalls, Deku. Katsuki interrupted, the crinkle in his nose giving away the fact he was fighting not to roll his eyes. As if you fucking got any. Izuku squeezed his hand tighter. See, what I think of as flaws, you just see as, I don't know, a part of me, I guess. He fumbled for the right way to phrase what he meant. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're all our harshest critics, but the people that love us tend to be pretty forgiving. I'm sure that's how your dad saw your mom. I'm sure he didn't think of their time together as a chore. It's sad that things broke down between them, and I'm really sorry you had to witness that. It must have been awful for you. But I'm sure it wasn't your mom's personality that was the problem. Katsuki's only response was another grunt, but he squeezed Izuku's hand back with a crushing grip and slung an arm around his waist. A few more minutes passed, Izuku trying his best not to shiver, focusing his attention instead on the constellations above their heads. Then Katsuki nudged him gently. The people that love us, huh? Even though he was still turned away, Izuku could hear the smile in his voice. Could tell it was the mischievous grin he wore when he was intentionally stirring the pot. Yes, Izuku said, frowning. Like your mom and your dad. Uh-huh. The arm around Izuku's side pulled him closer, and Izuku's eyes widened at the prospect of them toppling headlong off the side of the roof. Kachan, be careful. If you want to act like the last little speech wasn't some dorky extended metaphor, then sure, we can pretend. Mind still on the Bakugo's failing marriage, what Izuku wanted to do was talk some more. Akatsuki's hand had started fiddling with the hem of his shirt, icy fingers drifting up to meet bare skin. Hey! Izuku cried, flinching away, very nearly losing his balance. Stop! Your hands are cold! He gave in to the fact that Katsuki had enough of heart-to-hearts, the taut atmosphere broken with scrabbling fingers and pleading yelps, voices echoing off the trees as they wrestled and descended into laughter. When Katsuki was done with his torture, they settled back under the blanket, coats rustling together. Looking back to the vast, inky night, immense and eternal in the way it hid its own secrets, Izuku took a deep breath and let the cold air fill his lungs. You know, Kachan, he said, snuggling back into Katsuki's side. Whatever happens, and wherever we end up, the stars will never change. We'll always be able to look up and know that we're both looking at the same sky, even if we're in totally different places. When he peered over his shoulder, he was greeted with a softer expression than usual. Katsuki lifted a hand to brush a thumb over his cheek. Such a fucking sap, he murmured without any heat. Leaning down, he pressed a soft kiss to Izuku's mouth. Necks angled awkwardly to the side. Neither of them hurried it, letting their lips cling together in a moment of sunshine that warded off the cold. But when they drew apart, Izuku couldn't help but shiver. Come on, Katsuki said, carefully shuffling towards the windscreen. I think that's enough stargazing for tonight, Freckles. Let's get you warmed up. Izuku slid after him, heart buzzing with joy at just how wonderful an evening it had been. A first date more perfect than he could have ever imagined. I don't want to go home, he said aloud, letting his thoughts run out through his mouth. His feet hit the floor to the sound of Katsuki's smirk. Who said anything about going home? He tittered, and as ever, Izuku went distinctly red. It turned out that Katsuki's idea of getting warmed up involved the two of them climbing into the backseat of the Jeep, and Katsuki pulling Izuku into a clumsy kiss by the collar of his puffer. Hot air whooshed from the AC unit, working the windows over with a fine translucent mist that obscured their surroundings. A pocket of toasty warmth that would make Izuku feel drowsy under any other circumstances. As it was, he was wide awake, movements illuminated by the dim yellow of the interior light. Cupping Katsuki's face, melting into the soft slide of tongue. Katsuki's hands, so often rushed and impatient, were leisurely as he unzipped Izuku's jacket, taking his time to slip beneath layers of fabric to sneak out the skin underneath. There was still a trace of cold to his fingers, enough to make Izuku gasp into their kiss, but this time it sent a thrill down his spine, delicate icy shivers reaching into every extremity. If their hands were still cold, then at least their mouths were hot, liquid gold and open for each other, slow and exploratory. Izuku leaned back against the door, sliding down against it, pulling Katsuki to slide between his legs. Careful hands smoothed up Izuku's sides, around to his back, drifting lower and encouraging Izuku's hips up so they could settle beneath his ass. God, it was the stuff of dreams, enough to make his thoughts a heady mess, happy and tipsy on the scent of Katsuki's wood smoke aftershave, all too easy to get carried away. Soft kisses dissolved into quiet moans, the hands at his ass kneading and massaging in circles that became increasingly frantic. Fuck. Katsuki's features were dim when they parted, but Izuku could make out heavy eyelids and darkened eyes. You don't have a clue what you do to me, he murmured, looking so innocent all the time, all wide-eyed like a baby deer in the headlights. With a soft groan, he dipped back down to press an open-mouthed kiss to the crook of exposed neck, and Izuku couldn't help but grind his hips up, head dropping back. You have no idea all the things I want to do to you. Anything, Izuku wanted to say, I'd let you do anything. But he reined himself in. Like what? He whispered instead, a breathless mess in Katsuki's hands. Pulling away, like it took a world of effort, Katsuki met Izuku's eyes. I could tell you, he said, mouth twisting into a grin. But I could also just show you. A pulse of current ran through Izuku's body at the sultry tone in his voice, fizzing pops of electricity that bounced down his arms, through his crotch. Okay, he whispered, and that was all it took before Katsuki was pushing himself up, untangling their limbs. Sit up. Izuku obediently complied, wrestling out of his coat. Katsuki's hands were already on him, tracing up the inside of his thighs, until he found the hard swell in his pants. They had done this several times before, and yet it still always felt overwhelming. Izuku unable to dampen the desire flooding through him whenever they touched. He groaned at the press of generous palm. From there, the lazy pace was abandoned. Izuku zippered down in a flash. Everything suddenly went fast and blurred. Katsuki wedging an eager hand into his pants, gripping and rubbing and stroking with his usual sense of urgency. Patience was not a virtue Katsuki Bakugo readily possessed. His every movement was hurried, yanking Izuku's boxers aside to take his dick in hand with a greedy possessiveness that made Izuku's heart race. All he could do was press his back against the leather seat, hand flying to the door handle for something to cling to. Oh my god, Kachan. Izuku couldn't help himself. Katsuki's name dripped from his mouth like honey. It was all he could think of against the wild swirl of heat coursing through his veins. Kachan, Kachan, Kachan. He wanted to say over and over again. Wanted to let Katsuki know he was all he thought about, all he wanted. Wanted him to know that he was just so good with his hands. Always so good. Always had just the right grip, the right looseness in his wrist. Okay, he was the best at everything. It stacked up. Rivulets of condensation began to trickle down the window pane. Izuku watching as Katsuki attended to him with utmost attention, jaw tense with concentration. He was just relaxing into the rhythm, letting himself ease into the sensation like slipping into a steaming hot bath, when Katsuki folded over without any warning whatsoever and took Izuku into his mouth. Oh fuck! It was soft, wet, warm, plush like velvet, sloppy as sin. Katsuki's head dropped, taking inch after inch, tongue sliding along the underside of Izuku's dick, and oh Jesus Christ, it was the best freaking thing Izuku had felt in his entire life. What are you doing? He managed to just about choke out before he lost the power of speech entirely, and the golden head in his lap pulled up with a tiny pop that Izuku committed to memory for every future jerk-off session ever. Sucking you off, obviously. Katsuki sat up, one hand still gripping the base of Izuku's dick, now glistening with spit. He swiped at his mouth with the other. Do you not want me to? No, it's not that, God. I want you to, Izuku said quickly. Are you sure? Do you want to? Holding Izuku's gaze for a moment with exasperated eyes, Katsuki lowered himself back down. We've been over this. I never do anything I don't want to do, he muttered, before parting his lips and beginning a steady bob of his head that had Izuku seeing stars. Every sensation was heightened and visceral, all zoning in on the point where Katsuki's hand worked in tandem with his mouth. The curl of fingers and the squeeze of his fist, twisting and chasing every inch of flushed skin. The ripples of pleasure that swelled closer and closer together, building to a wave that swept everything else aside. Izuku stared down in unabashed awe, able to make out Katsuki's hollow cheeks, lips spit sore and red, tendons strained in his throat. Kachan, oh my god. The words poured out in a torrent of nonsensical babbling. Izuku clutching at anything he could reach and holding on for dear life, hands smearing against the window, dark streaks cutting through the stain. Every time Katsuki swallowed, it made him weak at the knees, and the elbows, and the shoulders, and every other joint you could name in his whole damn body. The soft slurping sound, unimaginably erotic. His brain couldn't quite process it, the fact that Katsuki was so intent on bringing Izuku pleasure, so serious about it, and even maybe enjoying it. if the way he was groaning around Izuku's cock was anything to go by. It was so hot. There was no way Izuku could last. He tried to stammer out some kind of warning. I can't. It feels so good. I can't hold on. You should. But Katsuki only sped up the pace with characteristic defiance. Pale brows furrowed in focus. A sunburst of tingles set off in Izuku's legs, shuddering down his thighs, building and climbing and driving him right to the edge. Oh fuck! His eyelids fluttering shut on the brink of his orgasm, and all he could see behind them was red, searing, seething red, flashing to white as his hips lifted from the seat with a stutter. He was crying out, saying something he couldn't even hear, totally deaf to the world. And all the while, Katsuki kept sucking, seeing Izuku right through the peak of it and not letting up, waiting until he winced at the overstimulation and began patting at Katsuki's back with rapid, insistent hands. Stop! His voice was a quivering wreck, broken and throaty and raw, and he hadn't even been the one with the dick in his mouth. Relenting, Katsuki finally pulled away, turning his head with a look so smug it could rival every cat that had ever gotten the cream. Told you it'd be better if I showed you. Izuku could forgive the cockiness when he'd just blown him so thoroughly. His brain had turned to soft serve inside his skull. He tried to remember how to form his lips into the shapes necessary for speech. Oh my god. It was okay if he never spoke again. It was worth it. Katsuki sat back, cheeks flushed with satisfaction. Yeah, he said. I was hot as fuck. I'm hard as a fucking rock. Izuku looked down to Katsuki's pants, where a considerable bulge lay along his thigh. Flicking his eyes up to meet Katsuki's gaze, he reached out a hand. Can I? Sitting back and propping his arms behind his head, Katsuki nodded, still all too pleased with himself. Be my guest. Once Izuku had worked an enthusiastic hand into his boxers, it didn't take long. A few frenzied strokes, and Katsuki's eyes were squeezed shut, teeth gritted, curses hissed out like a sailor. Izuku nearly got hard again over the face Katsuki made as he came, lips softly parted, groaning, both of them well and truly serviced to completion. It took a few minutes of them sitting side to side, chest heaving, before Izuku's breath returned to a regular cadence. The car was humid, sticky, pretty gross by all accounts, but Izuku was too happy to care. He wiped his hand on his jeans and leaned in to plant a kiss on Katsuki's face. Thank you for tonight, he whispered, brushing his nose against his cheek. I really had the best evening. Katsuki smirked as he rebuttoned his pants. Damn right. You expect anything less? I planned the best first dates on the planet. Don't forget it. Izuku smiled. I won't. Once they had both rearranged their clothes and gotten themselves decent, they hopped back into the front of the car, ready to begin the drive home. Katsuki snorted when he looked over his shoulder to reverse out of the parking spot, and Izuku followed the line of his gaze to the unmistakable outline of a handprint that was still visible against the steamed-up back window. Like goddamn Titanic up in here. Izuku slapped a hand over his mouth, laughing too. Oh god, sorry, I got carried away. Katsuki grinned. Glad I could rock your world, Freckles. Turning the music on, he swung the car out of the bay and set them back on the road, leaving the cold, dark night behind them. Izuku felt so filled to the brim with happiness, he could burst. Oh, his world had been rocked alright.